In lesson 2, we learned the te form conjugation for verbs. In English, only verbs can be conjugated. For example, we can say I eat goes to I ate as a past tense conjugation. But if we wanted to change I am happy into past tense, we would say I was happy. In both of those examples, the word happy stays the same. The part that we're changing is the am changes to was. The verb of the sentence changes. But in Japanese, nouns and adjectives both can conjugate. And that's what we're going to learn here, is the te form version of nouns and adjectives. It's very important to know that whenever we're conjugating nouns and adjectives, there's only 2 groups. That's very different from the verb conjugations we did with te form in lesson 2. We were looking at that big long list of all of the different conjugation rules for all of the different verb enders. But again, with nouns and adjectives, there's only 2 groups. You might expect the 2 groups to be nouns and adjectives, but unfortunately it's not. Instead, it's going to be e-adjectives and everything else, where everything else is not adjectives and nouns. That's always going to be true for conjugations with adjectives and nouns. There's only those 2 groups, and not adjectives and nouns will always conjugate together, where the e-adjectives will conjugate in a different way. Let's take a look at that. The easier ones to conjugate are the nouns and not adjectives. When we're conjugating nouns and not adjectives, it will always be the case that we're only adding to the word instead of changing the word. In this case, we're going to be adding de to the end. So Ringo, if we wanted to put it into te form, would be Ringo de, and that's our te form of Ringo. Of course, when we were learning te form for verbs in lesson 2, we learned that te form on its own is command form when you're telling somebody to do something. So nomu goes to nonde, and nonde is used to command somebody to drink. You might think, well, how does that work with Ringo? If you say Ringo de, are you commanding somebody to apple? Of course, that's not the case, and with nouns and not adjectives on their own in te form, it doesn't really mean anything in most cases. It's only going to be useful when we're using it in other ways, for example, te form as a connector, the next thing that we're learning in lesson 3. But again, Ringo de is our correct te form for Ringo. Na adjectives would be the same, like Genki changes into Genki de. We're just adding de, and that's it. For e adjectives, we're going to take off the e and replace it with kute. It's very, very common for e adjective conjugations that the e is taken off. It will happen in almost every e adjective conjugation. So as an example, oishii, we'll take off the e and we just have oishii. And then we'll put on the kute, so it's oishikute. And altogether, that should sound like oishikute, oishikute. And that is our te form of oishii. That'll work for pretty much all e adjectives. So samui goes to samukute, or atsui goes to atsukute. And that's our e adjective te form rules. There is one important exception. And once again, it's one of our most important words. The word e, which means good, in te form will be yokute. A little bit tricky, but the good news is because there's only these 2 categories, conjugating nouns and adjectives is much, much easier than it is to conjugate verbs. As with anything in Japanese, the best way to learn it is to practice, so get out there and start conjugating some nouns and adjectives.